Hello, everybody. Happy Wednesday. Welcome back into another edition of PTN Extra. I'm Evan Kamiko, joined alongside Mike Irwin. Mike, again, for the second week in a row, we're not in the studio. Instead, we're out here. Gorgeous day today on this Wednesday, and we're at practice fields doing some football camp. Day 7 officially wrapped up today. Just give me your overall thoughts on what you saw this morning.
You know, every year, fans always ask me, what's the most impressive thing or what's the biggest surprise? And the fact of the matter is it changes day to day. But today, first thing I noticed was cooler weather. It's starting to heat up now, but it was cooler. So I think they went longer and they looked a little fresher. So that's important. But who looks the most impressive? What's the biggest surprise? I think last week when Ben Souter said that he, first of all, in 16 years of being a strength and conditioning coach, he had never had a group work this hard in the summer. And that's important, what you do before you get here, what kind of shape you arrive in. And then he said, the group I want to see the most is the D-line. I'm thinking, really? So I went to the roster and I started looking. They've got 6 guys that are fourth-year players or above. You know, Landon Jackson's a true senior. Cam Ball, I think, is a true senior. Eric Gregory is a 6th-year player. Nico Davier, he's a 6-year player.
Yeah.
You know, Kiwi Rose, all these guys have been around the block. And so it starts with that. And then the D-line coach, Deke Adams, said, look, I got 2 extra guys helping me right now. They've got that new rule where assistants to assistant coaches can actually do coaching. So he said, right now we've got 3 guys coaching the D-line so we can break them up. We can do more individual work.
Yeah.
They've got 2 or 3 really good, promising young players that will come along faster because of that. And because you've got so many upperclassmen, you don't have to spend as much time with them. So you spend more time bringing guys up. And then the whole thing about an entire SEC season going with D-line guys, you gotta switch these guys out. You can't just stick somebody out there for every rep. Well, look at all the depth they've got. I mean, they may have 6, 7 guys playing this year. If you don't get anybody hurt, I think this team is going to be in shape. I think those guys are going to be able to move. I'm just impressed with the D-line.
And, Mike, it's worth noting, too, we didn't even talk about Anton Junkaj, one of the big transfers. He came from Albany, had a monster season
Exactly.
there. And not to mention Charlie Collins, one of the top guys in the state of Arkansas, who actually ended up coming to Arkansas, and he's a freshman looking to make a name for himself. But, you know, the guys kind of touched on him that he wasn't there yet physically, size-wise, weight-wise. But, you know, you're going to expect him to get there in the next 2 to 3 seasons. But it's a crew that's really evolved and I think really, you know, hungry, especially last season. Landon was able to get to the quarterback a lot. You'd love to see, again, the growth of Cam Ball, Nico DeVilliers, and some of these other guys as well. And today was all focused about the D-line, so we really got an up-close and personal look. When you look at what we saw today, as well as what we were able to hear in the press conferences after, what was so important for you? What did you really keen in on?
I like the fact that they talked about last year, and they didn't say this directly, but what those guys seemed to be saying was, because the offensive line was so bad last year, we didn't get the work we needed going into the season. We could have been better if we'd been better challenged. So, for instance, Landon Jackson is going up against Fernando Carmona. Both of those guys are going to be in the NFL next year. They're going up against each other now, and not just that, but that whole offensive line, D-line thing. And then we also got a question on Ask Mike, which I wasn't sure of because we don't see the whole practice. And the question was, are they doing any tackling? If so, if not, when are they going to do any tackling? They've only been in pads 2 or 3 practices, but Landon Jackson said something that just shocked me. He said on day 1 we tackled. They must have did it after we left. They didn't even have full pads on and they were doing tackling. They've had some live periods. He said every practice they've had some live periods, but of course tomorrow on Thursday that's going to be a full-scale scrimmage. But again, it's that physicalness between the offensive line, which is improved, and the defensive line, which is better because they're being challenged, that I think is going to make a huge difference with this team.
And I'm curious for you, when we were kind of just driving over here, you were talking about, you know, Barnhill being tin and the roads being dirt, and all of your time in Arkansas. Have you heard that before where the guys are saying, no, we were tackling on day 1, or is that something you haven't heard before?
No, I've never heard of that. And again, we don't see the whole workouts. I've never – just as 2 years ago, Sam Pittman was talking about, we really don't like to do live tackling in the preseason because guys can get hurt. So we do this thudding thing where you simulate tackling. And then last year he came out and said, the thudding thing's not working, so we're going to take a chance in a live tackle. So my question was, are they going to do it again this year? And I didn't know until today. They started doing it on day one, so that's pretty incredible.
Absolutely. Now, when you look at around, anything else you want to talk about the D-line, or should we talk some offense?
Let's talk about some offense. Same thing going on between the receivers and the D-backs. Those battles are what's making this team better.
What's the battle that's caught your eye so far?
Look, there's two things. First of all, every single guy who caught a pass on this team last year is back. So you start with that. There's about four or five of those guys, and then they've added through the portal 3 or 4 more receivers. So again, you go and you take your roster, and every time you see an impressive play, you go, oh, and you underline a guy, and then you're talking 6 guys.
Yeah.
So then you're thinking, okay, but yeah, there were 4, because I was asked, okay, is Tevin Green, Taylon Green, is he throwing picks like he did at Boise State? And I'm thinking, yeah, he's thrown some. But then you go back and look, it's because that secondary is good.
Yeah.
And so they've got the same thing going on. They've gone into the portal. They brought in some new guys. They have some guys that were already here that were good. So now you may have 6 receivers going up against 7 or 8 D-backs.
Right.
And it's a battle every single time. And with Bobby Petrino's offense, yes, you're going to get some guys open. For instance, Isaac Tesla, he's now in a slot because they're going to use him more inside because he's tall, but he's not real fast, but he's got good hands.
And a big frame.
And a big frame. So he goes inside and he can catch a 6-8-yard pass. They've got other guys, Satenya, who's got speed. They brought in Anthony, a freshman who's got speed.
Yeah.
And so you see Petrino sometimes getting these guys wide open, and you're thinking, oh, that's bad for the defense, because that's the way this thing works. Every time one side looks good, the other looks bad. But you don't have to do that with this unit, because as soon as a wide receiver is wide open and makes a great catch, the next time there's a pick. So it's good back and forth.
Yeah, and I love that you brought up Satenya and Jordan Anthony, 2 guys that I'm really curious in. We saw Satenya kind of come on in that Alabama game where he caught 2 touchdowns and had a really big day against their Tide. But then you look at Jordan Anthony, a guy who transferred in from Texas A&M, ran track at Kentucky, ran track and played under Bobby Petrino, and Petrino was running the Texas A&M offense last year. So he's got some familiarity already with the system and how it works. And it'll be really interesting. Again, you look at the guys on the outside who we haven't talked about, Andrew Armstrong and Tyrone Broden. Armstrong, again, coming back, was the leading receiver last year, should be the leader this year. And Broden is a guy who's got a lot of size, got a lot of frame, kind of like the rest of them. But there's a lot of question marks on his health after he wasn't healthy last year.
Well, Broden was a guy that you looked and you said, well, boy, the talent is there. What's going on? He just didn't catch a lot of passes. Now he's doing all these amazing things. Armstrong, the same thing. So you got starters that look the part, but what I'm saying is you got a real rotation now. You don't have to keep running the same guys out there every time, but they're being challenged. And just like I talked about with the offensive line, defensive line, last year, I don't think you got the defense challenged enough. So they get into games and they start getting beat. Now you're going up against quality receivers, you're going up against quality defensive backs, and they all make each other better, and they're not going to be for a big shock when they go to Oklahoma State.
Yeah. And not to mention, too, you talk about defensive backs. Obviously, Jalen Braxton coming back. The Metcalf brothers have really looked good. And I'm curious to see Selman Bridges, really tall, lanky freshman who's going to put on some weight in the upcoming years, but just his ability to be able to challenge the other guys and learn from someone like Jalen Braxton, who was one of the best corners in the Big Ten. Wow, I'm thinking we're in Indiana. In the SEC last season. It should be really fun for this defense to come together and put it all into one.
Yeah, and again, you see somebody make a big play in that secondary, and you're thinking, who's that? And you have to go look the number up because it's a new guy. And then there's another new guy. And so I'm having to learn all these guys because I'm a visual guy. I don't like to sit around and memorize names on a roster. I get to know people by watching what they do, and I'm looking at the experienced guys and the guys I'm familiar with, and all of a sudden you see somebody and you're like, who is that?
Yeah.
And then you realize they've really done a good job in the portal, bringing in more receivers and more defensive backs.
I'm curious, two more things before we go. Let's start with the running backs, Braylon Russell and Jaquindon Jackson. It really seems like it's 1 and 2 with them today. Jackson running with the ones, Braylon Russell running with the twos earlier today. Both of them really physical backs. Does that excite you to see this young freshman like Braylon Russell from Little Rock, from Arkansas, making waves right now in fall camp?
Yeah, you wonder if he's too heavy. I remember, what
happened. A little bit like Rocket Sanders last year.
You wonder if that's going to be an effect. You tend to think when they start talking about fullbacks that he might be the guy, but that's not what we're told. And we saw them a couple of days ago line up and do this kind of power eye with a fullback thing, and they're going right up the middle with it. It's interesting on the internet because you get such interesting reactions. A guy on the internet said, "Well, thanks." He's talking about whatever media outlet ran this video. I don't think this was us. He goes, "Well, thanks for telling Oklahoma State what we're going to do." And I came back.
Gotta love the guys on the internet.
I couldn't resist. I came back and I said, I've done this for a long time. Let me tell you something about coaches. When they let you shoot something, let you show it on the air, and let you talk about it, they're probably not going to do this right away. What they're going to do is that the early opponents are going to look at this and go, oh, they're doing that, and they'll have to work on it. And then you don't use it, and they're going, oh. So you go 2 or 3 games, and you don't use it, and so then opposing coaches are going, well, they're not doing that, okay. And they forget about it. Boom, that's when you go to the power eye.
Yeah, and that's all the misdirection that I think that comes with fall camp and what we as media are able to see versus what fans are able to see online and other teams as well. Last thing before we go, we got to talk quarterbacks. Week 2 now, Taylon Green in this offense as he gets ready for that third week and really the second week as we're only 7 days in. What do you want to see out of him, and where have you seen him grown the most so far?
Again,
from what we can see.
Watching, he's just more consistent. Now, he's still throwing picks, but he's throwing picks now because there's some really good plays.
Yeah.
And there's not always great separation. There is at times. I will say this, if a receiver's open, he's generally hitting them, and he's throwing a lot of really impressive touchdown passes. I think he's matured. I think he's – if you watch some of these one-on-one sessions they've showed where he's with Petrino, there's a good classroom effect there. They're really talking, and he's really understanding what Petrino's saying because Petrino's asking him questions. What does this mean when this guy comes up? What do you do? And he's giving the right answer. So all of that's impressive. But I really think they've got depth too. They don't. When they do a rotation, when the quarterbacks are out there, and it's not just him. I mean, at least 2 other quarterbacks have been impressive to me. Maybe not as much throwing the deeper balls, but especially on the shorter routes, which they're going to do. Coach
Pittman last week spoke really highly of Malachi Singleton. Somebody asked him about Taylon Green after his first press conference, and he actually ended the answer saying, but what I was really impressed with was Malachi. It wasn't Taylon, it was Malachi. He talked about Malachi twice on a question to Taylon, so I just think that shows the depth that's coming this year in this quarterback room, not to mention KJ Jackson, young freshman from Alabama, who's also getting third-team reps over guys like Austin Ledbetter and others in that quarterback room.
Well, when you go back to those years in which KJ Jefferson got hurt, I think it was 2 years ago, he missed 3 games, and he played in another game, but he wasn't 100%. They lost all 4 of those games. They didn't have an adequate backup quarterback.
Yeah.
You cannot assume in the SEC, which is a physical league, that Taylon Green is going to play every snap. You've got to have somebody that can come off the bench, and if your starting quarterback gets hurt, you're not going to automatically lose the game.
Right.
So it looks like they got 1, maybe 2 people back there because I still like the freshman, KJ Jackson.
Yeah, he's been looking really impressive. It's going to be fun to see him grow over the next couple of years. Mike, anything else that we've missed that you want to bring up on PTN Extra before we go?
Just conditioning. Again, what Ben Souders said. I think that you can't start the season behind the curve. You've got to be there from day one. Now, it's been hot. Today was the first time it really kind of cooled off. And they do have a new thing. It started last year. Right behind us over here, there's an air conditioner back there.
Yeah.
That building is air conditioned. People say, well, that's wussy. No, it's not wussy. Doctors figured out a long time ago that when you stick players out here in the August heat and run them, and that's why we don't have two-a-days anymore. Players were starting to break down before the season ever started, and then you had all these injuries in the season opener. You have to be smart. You have to know when it's too hot to go back inside because you don't want all of these crampings and these heat-related injuries that come as a result of that.
Yeah.
We haven't seen a lot of that. You don't see a lot. We watch them. The guys that are injured walk.
Yeah.
Well, today, what did we see? Three guys,
4, yeah.
3 guys walking. I've seen as many as 8 or 10.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another sign this team is in shape.
Yeah, all good things as we continue to move through fall camp. That is going to do it for this week's PTN Extra. For Mike Irwin, I'm Evan Kamiko saying so long, and we'll see you next Wednesday.